Hello, I'm Erica Helmedak reporting for Just Print It TV. I'm the co-editor-in-chief of Just Print It. Today on Just Print It, we're going to have Education Matters. This is a brand new TV show on Just Print It.
Thank you, Erica. I am Justin Whitaker.
And I'm Michael Averill.
And we are here to talk with Saugerties School Superintendent, Mr. Turner. Welcome, Mr. Turner.
Thank you very much, Justin. Thank you, Michael.
Mr. Turner, can you just give us an overview of what the Saugerties budget is to look like in the 2012-2013 school year?
Certainly. I'll do the best that I can, and feel free to ask any questions you might have. Of course, there's a lot of information that will be coming forward in the next 7 or 10 days that are going to change what we're doing. But in essence, there's been three goals established by the Board of Education for this year. Number one would be to provide appropriate educational planning for all of the students of Saugerties. Number two, to live within the confines of the new 2% tax cap legislation. And number three, to ensure that we're doing some long-term financial planning. I think in our budget we've been able to accomplish all of that, and that what we're trying to do is make sure that all of the academic programs and extracurricular programs that exist in this school year will carry over and will be there for students next year and the year after if we can have the support of the community. So that was our goal, and we've worked hard to do that, and I believe we can do that again, but it will take the support of every person in the community for us to accomplish all of those goals. But basically, the way school is now is the way we want it to be. At the very minimum, hopefully we can make it better over the course of the year. So,
how will you promote the budget to find support from the community for our schools?
That's a great question, Michael. I guess first and foremost, and I said that the next 7 or 10 days are what's going to be important as far as we need to get all of the information that we're going to need for next year, then finalize what the budget will be. I actually think right now taking this step in which I'm being interviewed by students for it to be broadcast on local access TV, that's something we've never done, and I think that gives a whole different section of the community an opportunity to see firsthand what this means to us and to the students. But we know that we need to first finalize what the budget's going to be and get those final numbers, because people want to know, what does this mean for us? What does this mean for, and once we can do that, we do publications. We do a district newspaper we'll put out there for everyone. We actually intend this year to be doing something called a budget bus. Once we get the final documents, probably late April or early May, in which myself and some other school officials, and who knows if there'll be PTA or students or anyone else, we're just going to try to get out in the community and avail ourselves. So if someone's going shopping at a supermarket or something and they want to stop and ask a specific question, they'll be able to do that. So we're going to be doing those types of things. And outside of that, I think Saugerties School District probably gets more publicity in the local newspapers than any other school district. So, but we do know that we need to communicate out to people to the best of our ability, so that they understand what things mean for them individually. And this is part of the process. So I thank both of you for allowing me this opportunity today.
Now, going into details with the budget, obviously the community wants the budget to pass, and we want things to stay into the school district. If the budget happens to go down, what are the first pieces on the agenda that will go away from the Saugerties School District?
I hope it's fair to say it's a little bit premature for me to answer very specifically, and of course I'm one individual and there's 9 members of the Board of Education that will go into this. you say that the community wants the budget to pass. I hope that that's the case, and I hope that I do a good enough job in presenting a budget that would make them want to do that. Some of the things, though, however, that I could tell you right offhand are there's 2 positions, one in science and one in social studies at the high school, which are due to be filled because people are retiring, and we would probably choose not to fill those positions. And with that goes, in all likelihood, some of the elective courses, potentially some of the advanced placement courses. You know, again, I don't know that from where I sit right now I could say with exact specificity what those courses would be, but I do know that we wouldn't fill those positions, and that's kind of natural. The second thing being we have some substitute custodians or part-time custodians that work in different buildings. We would have to adjust how we deploy our custodial workers, but that would take a hit. We don't intend to be doing anything with athletics right now, but we're also very aware that some of the neighboring districts are dealing with a much more difficult financial picture. And so we need to pay attention if 3 or 4 other districts, in example, don't have JV sports. That may be natural for us. Again, we don't want to touch that now. There's all kinds of considerations, but these are things that are on people's mind. And then we would have to relook at the class sizes at the elementary level. There are things that we do because they make educationally very good sense. You know, I don't want to get into too much of those details right now, but we may be forced to have to adjust what the educational settings are at the elementary level, and I've said that there'd be a number of other support staff that we would have to take a look at. So it's a little bit too premature now for me to say with specificity, but again, probably in the next 7 or 10 days, these are the answers that'll come true. By the way, I keep saying the next 7 or 10 days. Here's why. Number one, New York State will be setting their budget before April 1st. We were hoping that we had it now. Once they do, that tells us how much revenue we're going to get from New York State. We think it will be more than we were anticipating, but we don't know. Also, our district report card is due to come out in the next couple of days, and that will steer us toward decisions we need to make for next year. Where do we need to do AIS? Where do we need to beef up some of our educational programming? Where do we have some freedoms because maybe we're doing things that are super, but we can. So we're going to have to look at how we devote our resources, and that's not just money; that's personnel and planning. And you know, there's a lot of stuff, but we're going to reevaluate all of our special education population again. We've done this several times already, but just to make sure that we're doing the right types of things. And you know, another big part is our facilities, finding out what are the facilities needs and taking a look at is there anything significant. We've done some great things over the past couple of years that have been helpful, putting in high efficiency boiler systems, et cetera. And these are things people don't think about or know, but if we can, anything we can do along those lines, where sometimes it's an investment up front, but in the long term it's beneficial to the community and for the environment, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, I hope it's okay to say I don't have all of the answers as I sit here today, but to share with you what's on my mind about it. So, Michael?
You talked about the neighboring school districts before with the athletics, but also many of our neighboring school districts have been closing elementary schools. Do you see that happening in Saugerty's future?
Wow, great question. And Michael, I don't at this time. In the last 2 years, we've taken an in-depth look at it, and last year we actually held a committee with over 25 participants to take a look at it. And let me explain why. First, we're already looking at our kindergarten numbers for 12-13 are larger than they had been in previous years. So we're starting to see growth at the elementary level. But outside of that, over the past 5 years, anytime we've had space become available, what we've done is look to bring our students with special needs who might have been attending a school outside of the district, oftentimes at a very high cost. We've been very effective at bringing those programs back within house and establishing those programs and using the same staff and using the same space, and instead of sending them to a place in Albany or in Rhinebeck or Port Ewan, doing that within house. So when we evaluated closing an elementary school to see if it was feasible, the short answer was it was not feasible. Secondly, if we wanted to try and force it, and cram kids in with a shoehorn into what would be the three largest buildings, in order for that to happen, we would have to send these students out of district, and some of them could cost $30,000 or $50,000 per student. Not only that, it's the wrong thing to be doing, because if that was my child, I would want my child educated, as the law says, in the least restrictive environment. So that's what we really try to do. So we've been effective at that. So what we're doing is utilizing any space which became available. But the short answer is you just can't physically fit students from 4 elementary schools in 3 in Saugerties at this time. And the way the trends are going, it doesn't seem as though that's going to happen. The other part is, if you ever did close a school, and pay attention to these neighboring districts, what do you do with that building? Some people think you sell it or you lease it, but of the neighboring districts who have closed schools, those buildings have remained vacant and remained an albatross for the districts to have to handle. And I can run down the list, whether it's Tilson or the West Hurley School. There's where it used to be for the Cabrini home. These schools are now sitting there vacant, and they're, the districts still have to pay to maintain them and to handle them and to protect them from people either breaking in or vandalism or et cetera. So it's too simple of an answer. But Michael, great question.
Going along with Michael's question, maybe not closing a school, but could there be plans of maybe another redistricting plan in the district like we have done a few years ago?
I'm not seeing that on the horizon at this point. Again, when the redistricting was done, and of course I lived through it, I was the principal where I brought on 100 new students to Morse Elementary School. At that time, the numbers at Cahill Elementary School were above 600, and they were also close to that at Riccardi Elementary School. And so there was a desire to balance those at that time and take some of the students who would have attended Riccardi and sent them to Mount Marion, and from Cahill to Morse. And I think we're now looking at that. We are pretty well balanced among the 4 elementary schools. So I'm not seeing that.
What is your relationship like with the assistant principal, superintendent, Mr. Apostle?
Oh, the assistant superintendent, Mr. Apostle? Let me say, and I don't know if you talk about Mr. Olson in there as well. He's our school business official. But because it's important that I speak with kind of all 3 of us, in that we all have very complementary type of things that we bring to the table. I'm probably one of the youngest superintendents in New York State, and yet Mr. Apostle is probably one of the oldest assistant superintendents in New York State. You may or may not know, but the board just signed him to a new contract, which will have him working with us until he's 70 years old. And so it's great to have kind of a balance. Mr. Apostle is a true workhorse when it comes to getting things accomplished, and he's great on keeping a lot of the day-to-day things going, and also New York State education has undergone some significant changes in the last 2 years. Maybe you guys know, or maybe you don't, but we've changed our teaching standards. We're changing our evaluation systems for teachers and for principals. Mr. Apostle's the guy who really has to make sure that the district is keeping up with these new laws and regulations, and that all of our teachers and administrators are getting trained appropriately for it. So I've got to have a lot of trust and a lot of faith in him to keep those things going. So. Because again, just overseeing the curriculum and instruction piece to his job, which is really what the primary part of what he should be doing, in this time of very great fluctuation in education in general. He's my right-hand man when it comes to curriculum and instruction, and Mr. Olson is my right-hand man when it comes to the economics of the school district and maintaining the facilities. And then it all comes together for me, who's got to kind of know all of these things and balance it. And with both of these gentlemen, Michael, we don't always agree, and that's what's great when you have an effective relationship, where you can sometimes, you need to be able to challenge each other and challenge each other's thoughts, and that really does happen all of the time. So I don't pretend to know everything, but I need to know where to go to get answers, and these guys are good at what they do. Again, we're not perfect, but I will say amongst the three of us, we're very committed to the Saugerty Central School District, because we all understand at the end of the day, it's really about kids. It's about providing the best quality education that we possibly can.
What projects are you working on with Mr. Apostle or your other administrators?
Great. Probably the biggest projects right now, though, have to do with the new evaluation systems for teachers and for administrators. Although that's really what's, he's spearheading it, and I've got to be aware of it, and I've got to pay attention to what it means also, for the dollars and cents and the training, etc. But it's what's referred to as the APPR, which is the Annual Professional Performance Review. And this is where New York State has kind of changed in that student performance is now going to be, student performance on standardized tests and on a local measure are what's going to now be a numerical value for teachers. But there's some bumps in the road. Like an example, how do you handle a teacher of physical education? Because students are going to be taking an ELA, English Language Arts, or a math. So what grade do you give them? Or someone who's a psychologist in the district. They may do a great job, but does student performance on math have anything to do with their job and the quality of their job? So these are all of the intricacies that need to get worked out. And that's really the big one for the next 2 or 3 months, though, because it just takes a lot of coordination of different people to get that pulled off. So.
Our school district tends to get more publicity on negative things than it does on positive things. How do you plan to change this?
Boy, Michael, that's great. One thing I learned is that I'd actually asked some of the local authors for some of the local newspapers as to why that happens. And what they explained to me is because they sell newspapers in the Saugerties area. And so it has to do with the distributorship of the newspapers. So I know it's very intriguing. I think my name has probably been in the Daily Freeman more so than any other person in the last 3 or 4 years. And sometimes when it's not even related to the school district, it still comes back to the school district. One thing I'd already done is tried to work with the members of the Board of Education, that they knew that I'm the mouthpiece for the district, and that it's actually in board policy and other things, so that there's only one voice coming out speaking about the school district. Now, listen, if there's someone at a Board of Ed meeting who wants to quote something said by any Board of Ed member, that's fine, because that's part of the meeting. But outside of that, then it falls back on me as the superintendent of schools to be the person who speaks about the district issues. And both of you gentlemen have known me for quite a while, and you know that I'm pretty well spoken, and I actually choose my words very wisely when it comes to public speaking. So I've tried to control what the messages are, but I still can't stop what the editors of the newspaper want to put in. Don't forget, their job is not necessarily to report the news. Their job is to sell newspapers, and those aren't the same things, because we have phenomenal student performances that never make the newspaper. We have outstanding students doing outstanding things that don't make the newspaper. I guess they found that there are certain controversial issues that do, in fact, sell the newspapers. So, again, I kind of laugh because a lot of these things that I watch have nothing to do with the school district, and all of a sudden they become school district issues because that's what, I guess that's what the people are buying the newspapers for, I guess. So.
Going back to a comment that you had said earlier about maybe a science teacher and social studies teacher not getting refilled in the next year because of retirement, at the past budgets or the past board meetings, they've said that 3 teachers are going to get cut if the budget does happen to go down or whatever. Could those 2 spots be included in those 3 teachers, or would it be 3 additional teachers being cut?
I think that you're confusing a couple things here, and if the discussion at the board meetings have been regarding cuts that are planned at this time. Some of those teaching positions that they're speaking to have to do with really where class sizes are at the elementary level. So those wouldn't be necessarily cuts if the budget is defeated. Those are things that are being planned for in advance. Now, however, if you remember, I said that the next 7 or 10 days could cause the district administration and the board to reevaluate what our needs are. So it's kind of interesting the way the cycle for school finance works, in which really the same information you heard about in March is what was presented in late February. There was, maybe a 2-week difference, but not substantial changes in the educational environment or in the fiscal environment. But as I sit here with you today, 2 weeks later, knowing full well that kindergarten registration is now completed, we've got a few people on the cusp, we need to know what they're going to do. The state is going to follow up on letting us know what state aid we're going to get. We could ballpark our ideas in February, but we need to finalize them by early April. So that's really where we're sitting right now, is trying to get those numbers finalized. So I can't, but no, in the event of a defeated budget, and this makes some people uncomfortable, but I've got to stick to it. I see that every student would somehow be impacted. They may or may not feel the impact, but I would know that it's there. So it's just a little bit premature to kind of get into what the defeated budget is at this time. But that's why I'm actually hoping that maybe we could do a follow-up in a couple of weeks, and maybe the 3 of us sit down, or some other people, and revisit some of these same questions, and then I could answer with a great deal more specificity. Because it's only me at this time, but of course all of this action, it takes the Board of Education. That's who will set the budget. That's who will make these decisions. But I do provide them the information and make recommendations.
How do you interact with our board members?
Well, there's 9 different members of the Board of Education. In fact, I was speaking with Justin about this before we went on air. Every year, 3 seats get filled. So in a 3-year cycle, all 9 Board of Ed seats come up. We get along very well, and primarily because each one of the 9 members of the Board of Ed I've known who they are, and they've known who I am for years, but beyond when they were on the Board of Education. Interesting though, just as I said about, with the other central office administrators, we don't agree on everything, and there's a series of checks and balances. And that's kind of the way our country works and our state works, and that's okay. So they can provide input, but then I've got to make recommendations, but then they get to vote yes or no. And there's always going to be a question on certain things of whose job is whose. And that's a tough thing to figure out, and usually you only figure it out when you've done something wrong. I think that each of the 9 members are very supportive of the public school system, but they don't all have the very same opinions on every single topic, and they vote differently, and they are different. And the one thing I will say, though, is all 9 are very committed, and once you have that, then you've got a great foundation for running a school district. So there's no question to me that each of them are committed to their responsibilities.
What are your thoughts and feelings about the proposed sorority sports complex by Mr. Barisi?
I think that's a matter that's before the town board, and when we spoke about something in which in the newspaper, there ended up being a presentation at the Sororities Board of Ed meeting in March, which is fine to share some information. But one thing that we learned, obviously, Mr. Barisi has promoted that students from the school district would be able to use this for a variety of opportunities. And I at least appreciate that he held true to his word of what he said to me, and that's how he presented it publicly, and that's what's been written up. But if at his presentation, I learned that this would first take town board approval, then approval through New York State Legislature, and then eventually to be signed off on by the governor if he's to do it in the model that he's speaking of. It has become controversial for some people locally because his proposal is that it be built in the Cantine Field complex, and that brings forward its whole other host of legal issues, because what did Martin Cantine intend for that property to be? What's written in his last will and testament? I can't speak to it. How do people feel about town property being used for a for-profit organization? Again, these are the issues that people far more knowledgeable than I will have to address and have to handle. Our job was just to listen to the presentation, because obviously Mr. Barisi has made the offer that students would be able to use this free of charge during the school day. And from that perspective, that sounds like something good for the school, but I'm also not immune to all of these other legal and bureaucratic and political issues, again, though, that people far more knowledgeable about these types of things would have to handle and have to address. And I wish them all luck, and if it comes back to us, then we'll deal with it at that time.
What are your thoughts on the sports, music, library, and arts in a child's education?
I can't say enough how valuable. Run down your list, though, because you said sports, library.
Sports, music, library, and arts.
Sports, music, library, and arts. Each of those, and probably a few other things we could add to the list, really speak to educating the whole child. How could we determine that? What's the value of learning music to perhaps a student who may want to go into science, math, or engineering? You may learn things. It may trigger neurosynapses in your brain when you have to learn certain things. Really, each one of these things really speaks to the whole child. And you know what's great is, what about kids who excel in one thing but maybe not in another? They may be dynamic in their physical education class but not do well in music or in art, or someone who may be a phenomenal artist but not do well in music or phys ed. Someone may be a phenomenal musician but not do well in art or phys ed. You know, we have 3,000 students who attend our schools. I don't want 3,000 robots. I want 3,000 individuals who will contribute to a greater society. So we've got to have all of these offerings, and not only that, we have some phenomenal teachers in each of these areas. So, you know, Michael, whatever it is that you want to grow up and decide that you want to be to contribute to society, if something we've done along the way helped to spark an interest or got you thinking in a certain way, or maybe it's not something you choose to pursue as a career, but you want to fall back on, or you develop all of these skills. I mean, who's to say, you know, what was the most valuable thing that you learned in school? So, again, it's educating the whole child. We don't want, I think it's fair to say, we don't want robots. We want well-rounded individuals who can know and appreciate some of the finer things in life, and you know. But not only that, all of education is intertwined. It's, you know, take any one of those topics and you can apply that to something in science or something in math or something in social studies or something in English. All of those things are intertwined. You can't, you know, you can't disaggregate them. You can't take them individually. It does, you know, these are all, short answer, they're all key components to a quality education.
Definitely in sororities, what we saw with last year with the budget being defeated and the community members stepping up to keep these programs into the school district for the kids so that they're not out on the streets and not causing trouble in the community. They definitely stepped up and helped us attain these things to come back into the district. But we might not be able to see these things go down again and again throughout the years, because you know, we might not be able to get these fundraising efforts back into the district. So we like to see that the board is up on these things and want these things to be in the budget before it goes up for a vote, instead of saying, oh, well, we can save money with these things being out, and maybe the budget could get passed because they're out, and it would save the taxpayers money, whatever, how it goes. But it's good to see that the board members keep these things into the budget for the kids.
Well, that's more of a statement than a question, but I'll agree with you. But the only thing is, I'll clarify that the fundraising efforts actually were 2 years ago, if you remember how things had gone. So to kind of speak on behalf of the board, and really for myself and the other administrators, 2 years ago was when we first had the first round of austerity. And that was when there was significant fundraisers. As you know, I sat in the dunk booth to help raise money for athletics, along with lots of other things, going to great auctions, and there were some really great things which happened. The synergy from people working together for a common cause. But I would like to think, at least I recognized, and perhaps the entire board, that we couldn't replicate that even last year. So last year we used what was called the Federal Jobs Bill, which was a grant which came down from the federal government. And I actually had an opportunity to speak to some national level politicians and complimented them for the way that grant came down. And that's really what helped us this year. Even though we were in austerity, we got this grant. And the reason I had to speak to those federal officials was because that grant did not get hung up in bureaucracy. It didn't funnel to New York State and then go to New York State Ed. It came specific for the federal jobs bill to only be used on jobs for people locally, and not all of the monies which come to New York State happen in that way. So that one, if you remember, Justin, I know you were there. I've been saying to lots of the booster clubs and the agencies, hey, I can help you out again. We can get you through again. We'll do our best for this budget coming up, but if the community comes out and speaks with a unified voice, and by the way, that's interesting, because you always hear people say, well, the community sent a common message. Well, no, really, it was less than 50 votes last time. So was that the community taking a strong stance? I don't know what it is, but at the end of the day, I'm going to try to do what I think is right for the students here. And so, I think that the board knows and accepts kind of what your point was, and that's why, some of their goals were to make sure, one of the first goals was to provide the most appropriate education. By the way, there's going to be the key term. What is appropriate? Well, the community is in a position where now they have to define themselves. If they want to continue to whittle away at these things, we can only keep the boat floating for so long. Or the decisions will be made for us. So it wouldn't be the board, wouldn't be the administration. Then it becomes the greater community, making their determinations. And I think that's why it's incumbent on each of us to make sure that they do know and understand what the implications will be. I'll just leave it at that.
In this difficult financial time for New York State schools, how will you maintain good teachers and ensure a positive and enriching educational experience for the children of Saugerties?
A lot of information in your question there. Listen, dollar signs do not equal good teachers. Good teachers are good teachers, and we are rife with great teachers. We don't just have good teachers in Saugerties; we have great teachers. I know because, actually, I think this year Mr. Miller retires, and after that I will be the longest tenured administrator in Saugerties. We have very, very committed educational professionals. So it's not just teachers; it's the assistants, it's the monitors, it's every person in this district works diligently. However, I think now it becomes our job to ensure that they now know what the new expectations are, because that comes down every couple of years, and we're in that again. We're dealing with national core curricular standards, which to you guys probably doesn't mean anything, but to teachers, they know that we're switching course from what we've been doing for about the last 10 years when we were trying to plan to be up to date on No Child Left Behind expectations. And a lot of these changes, by the way, are for the better. but it's my job to kind of champion these good ideas and to be knowledgeable about them, be able to speak with everyone, whether you're a second grade teacher at Riccardi or a 12th grade advanced placement physics teacher, and be able to communicate to them why going through these changes is a good idea. And you know what? I do believe they're a good idea. I think where the problems hit, though, are when people begin to analyze data with only part of the information or with no information. As we know, children are dynamic, and you can't take what Michael Averill did on one day in the spring on a math test and assume that tells me everything there is to know about Michael Averill's ability to do math. What that piece of data tells me is how Michael Averill did on that day on that test. And so you can't be making these analysis, particularly, some of the tests change year to year. So you've got to know the next level and the next levels. But as long as we have people who are committed, who are knowledgeable, who care about children, and have a good fundamental understanding of the subject areas that they teach, then we're going to be just fine. Because what we need to do is not have either of you memorize information. We need to develop you into being good thinkers, and get you to have the abilities to analyze and synthesize. And as you sit here and you guys react to the questions or the answers that I'm giving to your questions, and then you analyze and synthesize and come back with something else, you're really putting me on the hot seat here, talking about some topics that I didn't know we were going to go down these roads, but that's okay.
Now, going into savings for the budget, or however you see it, in recent times there have been talk that we might get rid of the security guards at the front of the elementary schools and possibly the high school, and there are some other areas that will help at the front doors, cameras or whatever. Can you explain how that would save the district, and what are the other areas that would help at the front doors for people to come in? Sure,
and Justin, as you know, that's actually been for the last 2 meetings of the Board of Ed. One of the top topics of conversation is there's a couple of board members who really wish that we would maintain those positions, because they say really where the idea came from is, again, really from me having been around. One day I asked people in an administrators meeting, I said, does anyone know what those extra phones on someone's desk is? And it's no fault of anyone's, but it's really only because I lived through the last building project. You have to understand, when the building project went on, the left hand didn't always know what the right hand was doing. And so when no one could answer, and I said, do you know that those phones are actually a security system whereby you can see people at the front door and choose to buzz them in or not? By the way, I need to be straightforward. Some things happened in the building project where the final touches were never put on those doors. And so I began to say, well, we need to make sure those final touches get put on, that the right wires get connected so that those electromagnets fire when they're supposed to fire. And then it became, well, if that system works, is there another way to go about doing business? Because you asked, how does it save money? Well, because then you're not paying the salary for those people who are the front door security monitors. Justin, though, that's one of those very difficult decisions, though, that when it was discussed in February, and then you look at some of the things which have happened in the world, and it kind of always reminds you, it comes back to what is the best way to ensure that all of our students are going to be kept safe during school hours. And I hope it's fair to say these are things that I need to go back and think about, and it's because of the dialogue that happens at board meetings, or the dialogue that happens, even with you guys, or when I go downstairs and I'll speak with the front door security monitors. And if we're going to maintain the position, though, if we're going to maintain it, it's time that the position changes, and that we actually I've started to work with Joe Sinagra, who is the deputy chief for Saugerties Town Police, and he'd been a school resource officer for many years. In fact, that's how I actually first got to meet him. And so he and I are having some pretty in-depth discussions about what we could do. So stay tuned when it comes to specifically to that position. But if we are to maintain it, then we are going to adjust what the job responsibilities are.
Now, do you see in the schools, do you see a goal for the future, where you want the district to be, maybe financially, maybe in the curriculum? Where do you foresee the district in the future?
Wow. Well, I would like for us to be in a position where finances are kind of a secondary conversation, where we're at least on in good financial health, so that we don't have to watch all of the time, so that I don't have kids who are worried about school budgets. And that's really what's going on for the last 3 years. And, in my upbringing, I wanted to make sure that the kids can worry about being kids and leave the adult problems to the adults. But obviously this has permeated all the way through our community. There's, everyone is aware that, I've got some great ideas and some things that are being worked on, along with some individuals across Ulster County. When I attended the talent show at the high school last week, and I saw the phenomenal performances, one after the other, after the other, after the other, and I realized that those performances aren't getting the publicity that they should be. And we have students doing phenomenal things in every nook and cranny of this district. When I was at Mount Marion for the Board of Ed meeting, and we listened to Mount Marion Cares, and they ran down the list of things that they've done. When we went to Cahill, again, another presentation by students of all the phenomenal things they had done. When I went to Morris here and watched 40 students performing for music, instrumental and choral. And it's the same thing at Riccardi, but through the junior and senior high. What we need to, we're at such an interesting time, because even as we're surrounded by books and things, we know that technology is developing so fast, and individually I do my best to keep up with technologies. I've got my iPhone, whatever, but we really need to tap into technologies and figure out how to be using this as a more universal learning tool, so that it's not just the value of your smartphones are not just being able to text people or to FaceTime people or whatever else. There are phenomenal applications which we could be tapping into. Will we see the day in which textbooks go by the wayside to be replaced by tablets? I mean, we're already at that point, and the world keeps turning. So what else? What is the next thing? How do we integrate all of these technologies? How do we bring it back around? How do we have students? But then again, how do we make sure that the important things in life, that you actually stop and smell the roses sometimes too, and there's a value to that. So, providing every student the optimum learning opportunities is what I would want to have. But again, because there's at least 3,000 different students, that means there should be 3,000 different plans for what's best. And I want to get there.
What are some of the duties of a school superintendent?
Wow. Well, probably the most famous one is I get to decide 2-hour delays and snow days, although not an awful lot this year. And last year it was very problematic. School superintendent is what's referred to as the chief executive officer for the school district. So I have ultimate responsibility for everything in the district. Each building principal has responsibilities that are under their building, but there's all of these aspects, so it's in, but I have to ensure that policies are written and policies are adhered to. Those are kind of the laws behind everything that we do. And boy, those things, they don't move fast. Have to deal with attorneys very regularly for whether we're negotiating contracts with individuals or with unions, dealing with labor law, ensuring that that the parents and the students, parents, guardians, that their needs are addressed, worrying about facilities. You know, Michael, if I really never stop working, even when I'm not at work. You're still handling business of some sort, or you're, wrestling with a new idea or a different idea, and but we have about 450 employees, so you've got to oversee all of the human resources piece to that, and just like we have almost 3,000 different students, each of those 450 different employees have different issues that need to be addressed along the way. But my job is between board meetings to make sure that the district gets run on a day-to-day basis, and then going back to the board for their support on a monthly basis. But it's I don't know if I've answered your question, but please, if there's something more specific you want to answer or you ask of me, by all means. But in essence, I am responsible for all things from the custodian who mops the floor to the basketball player making a layup. I've got to make sure that the athletic director has the things he needs so he can hire the coach, so that the basketball player can have somebody to coach them, and that there's lights on in the gymnasium, or whether it's the math teacher who is going to need the textbooks for their classes. And then I've got this other interesting piece too, where I have to be the spokesperson for the district, both for the local newspapers, but also I was lucky enough to go up to the governor's office and speak on behalf of the district. It was actually with his top two education aides, Dave Wakeland and Katie Campos. And I would like to think that the things I said are what students and teachers and community would want me to be saying. So being out there advocating all of the time for our district, making decisions along the way, some of which you guys will never see, but are very important, because by me making a decision that's way over here, it's actually helping you way over there, but again, you wouldn't know it. So, and that's okay. That's where I want the adult problems to lie with the adults, so that students can just be students and worry about the things that you have to worry about, which I can still appreciate are pretty significant too, in case a lot of adults don't remember, but going to school can be very tough.
At previous board meetings, there's been some positions that have been outrated to BOCES in a cost-saving manner.
Outsourced, yeah.
Can you comment on how those positions are going to be helped by BOCES, and how the district will work with BOCES to fulfill those positions?
Sure. BOCES stands for the Board of Cooperative Educational Services, and it was invented in the 1950s. And the idea was at that time that, and it's the right idea now, that when local districts can cooperate with each other, we can hopefully do things less expensive by joining forces. But some interesting things happen with BOCES Aid, and that is it's a revenue, so an example, one of the things that we just did that through was for our data administration. In essence, we were paying a person a salary here for almost the same cost as that person's salary. We can buy into BOCES, and now we're paying almost that cost, but now we're getting a revenue stream on almost 50% of what the cost is. So in just good business sense, if you can get the same level of service but get it for half the price, you've got to go down that road, and you've got to take a look at it. But it's an interesting beast dealing with BOCES, because there's a whole host of other oversights and paperwork, etc. But really what happens is that a lot of it becomes BOCES Aid. So it's a method for generating revenue. Sometimes it doesn't lower your expenses, but the cost savings is there, because while your expenses stay the same, you've made revenue.
My last question is, as a sixth grader, I've wondered what my junior high and high school experiences will be like. What do you see in the school's future for the next 5 to 6 years?
With the support of the community, I see that the school will continue to improve in the next 5 to 6 years. And specifically, you will likely be there to see some of these benefits. And I have to always go back to with the support of the community, because I can only lead us so far, and then it's left up to the board and it's left up to the voters. And if the voters say yes and they're supportive, then we're all on the same page and we're going in the direction where I could say to you, Michael, in the next 2 years, you're going to start to see what had been kind of an inverted bubble of population. Your first year at Saugerties Junior High School, there will be almost the exact same numbers of students in that facility that there are this year. But starting next year, those numbers start to drop. Okay, that's this bubble which is now currently in our grades 2 through 6. When they drop, at no additional cost, all of a sudden there will be teachers who should have some time available to be offering more electives. Or we'll start to allocate resources for different types of programs. One thing that I'm working with the BOCES people on, and I kind of wanted to speak to this in the earlier question, we're looking to actually establish a regional school for students in science and technology. This would be like a BOCES run program, but we're really looking at because we see, again, so many opportunities that are out there. This would be something that I'm really working hard with the other superintendents across Ulster County to move in this direction. It's kind of weird though, because you're saying, hey, I want to set up a school somewhere else so you can take my kids away from me. But if that's what's right for a population of students, then that's what we want to go and do. But Michael, what I see over the next 5 years is just continuous improvement in our course offerings or in allocations of our resources to ensure that 2, 3, 4 years down the road, we should be going in a very different direction than what, regretfully, Justin, what you had gone through in your last 2 years of your high school career, being on austerity and having to work hard to be doing all of the things just to remain status quo. I think next year, Michael, the best I could do is say we want to remain status quo, but from there, hopefully, we start to improve our educational programs.
Well, Mr. Turner, thank you for answering our questions. I think that with this, people will be more knowledgeable about the different questions that we had. And also, I would like to have a follow-up interview with you once you know some more of the aspects of the budget or money that you might be getting or expenses that you might have. And definitely a follow-up interview with you would be good so we can follow up on our questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you for watching Education Matters.
Thank you for joining us on Education Matters. This has been Erica Helmedak for Just Print TV.